Welcome to Reformed Thinking.
The show dedicated to digging into scripture and theology, helping you connect the dots between doctrine and daily life.
And now it's time for The Deep Dive. Welcome back. Today we're going to get into a concept that, it can sound a little jarring at first, but it's absolutely central to how we understand God's design for relationships. We're starting a major deep dive into the biblical roles within marriage. And we're drawing on some theological sources that connect Genesis 2, Ephesians 5, and this specific framework called Christian Hedonism.
And this is a really critical area to study. I mean, not least because the sources we're looking at are asserting that God designed human marriage for a purpose that goes way beyond just, human comfort or having kids.
Right.
So our mission really is to unpack this idea that marriage is designed to be a parable. It's meant to mirror the eternal covenant relationship between Christ and his church.
And that has huge practical implications.
It does. It dictates how the husband and wife function in their pursuit of what the sources call mutual holy joy.
So the sources we're using for this are a collection of theological notes and excerpts. They're all firmly rooted in the Reformed tradition, and they're all looking at how this idea of seeking joy in God applies specifically to the roles in a marriage.
Yeah.
We're looking at what it means for a husband to love and a wife to submit, and how all of that fits under this big banner of seeking maximum human happiness in God.
And we really have to start with the central claim that these sources make, which can be, a bit controversial. They argue that the reason for so much misery in relationships isn't that people are searching for their own happiness. I mean, every single person is wired to seek joy.
That's just a given.
It's a given. The misery, they say, comes from failing to seek your own joy in the holy joy of your spouse.
That is a huge distinction.
It's everything.
Yeah.
If you accept the premise that seeking happiness is this universal drive, then marriage, when you understand it correctly, becomes what the sources call the matrix for Christian hedonism. It's the place where that natural drive gets purified and channeled in the right direction.
Okay, let's start at the very beginning of this pattern then. We have to set the scene with the institution of marriage way back in Genesis 2.24, where we hear, they shall become one flesh.
Right.
And then we fast forward all the way to Paul in Ephesians 5, where he quotes that exact Genesis verse. And then he adds something pretty startling. He says, this union is a great mystery.
And that word, mystery mysterion in the Greek, is it's the absolute key. In the New Testament, it almost always refers to some kind of divine reality that was hidden for a long time but is now being revealed.
So it's not a mystery in the sense of a puzzle we can't solve.
No, not at all. It's a revealed secret. And if we just read Ephesians 5 without that context, we might assume Paul is just using human marriage, something we can all see and understand, to, illustrate the relationship between Christ and the church.
Right, using the known to explain the unknown.
Exactly. But the sources we're looking at, they challenge that assumption completely.
So, if the common understanding is that we use the visible human relationship to get a handle on the invisible divine one, what do the sources say is the actual mystery here?
The mystery is the reversal of that entire order. The sources are really clear on this. God did not create the union of Christ and the church based on the pattern of human marriage.
No.
Instead, he created human marriage on the pattern of Christ's eternal relationship to the church. That covenant, that relationship between Christ and his people was planned from all eternity, long before Adam and Eve were even formed.
Wow. That's a staggering claim. It just shifts the entire frame of reference, doesn't it?
It does.
It suggests marriage isn't primarily anthropological. It's not mainly about humanity. It's theological. It's a display of God's eternal purposes.
Precisely. And if we are people who hold to the doctrine of God's absolute sovereignty and his eternal decree, this actually makes perfect sense. God is the originator of the pattern.
He's the architect.
He's the architect. He looked upon the eternal design Christ as the initiating, redeeming head, and the church as the purified, responding body. And then he structured the human institution of marriage to visibly mimic that plan.
So marriage is symbolic from its very foundation. It's not just a contract. It's not an agreement for sharing a mortgage. It's a symbol, a parable, that's imaging forth what the sources calls stupendous divine realities. It contains and I guess it conceals a meaning that is way bigger than what we can see in the day-to-day interactions between two flawed people.
It's like the ultimate divine drama just playing out in miniature. Marriage is designed to be a visual spectacle of God's faithfulness and Christ's love.
Yeah.
As one of the notes puts it, as God made man in his image, so he made marriage in the image of his own eternal covenant with his people. And if we miss that symbolic layer, we are just going to perpetually misunderstand the roles God assigns.
And we'll see them as, culturally arbitrary or just outdated. Okay, so if marriage exists as this public display of the Christ Church covenant, that immediately forces the issue of distinct roles, doesn't it? I mean, if the two people in the marriage were just interchangeable, the whole pattern would be broken.
The roles are entirely rooted in that distinction between Christ and the church. They are not arbitrary social constructs at all. Christ is the head. He initiates love, gives himself up, sanctifies.
Right.
And the church is the submissive body. It responds to that love, it's being cleansed, it honors the head. So husbands get assigned the Christ-like function. Wives get assigned the church-like function. This is really the only legitimate explanation for why there are distinct, non-interchangeable functions in the first place.
But I can imagine a listener pushing back on that, saying, well, why couldn't God just create two exactly equal counterparts with no distinct functions and still have the model unity?
And that takes us right back to Genesis 2. The sources spend a good bit of time on that creation narrative. Adam is created first and he's alone. Then God parades the animals before him, and it's this picture of Adam seeing that nothing in all of creation is a helper fit for him. He needed a counterpart, a person, to share the love of God with.
And then the creation of Eve from Adam's own rib makes her so profoundly unified with her, bone of my bones and flesh of my flesh, but at the same time, profoundly distinct. She is female, not another male.
And that diversity is the key. It's what's needed to illustrate the relationship between Christ and the church. The sources argue that the unity you get from joining diverse, complementary parts is so much richer than just simple unison.
That's a great way to put it.
Think about music. If every instrument and every singer plays the exact same note, you get unison. It's a single, powerful sound.
Yeah.
But it's not harmony.
No.
But when you have the soprano, the alto, the tenor, and the bass lines all singing their distinct parts, but they're all working toward a shared goal, that's when you get harmony.
And that harmony, in this case, visually represents the different but unified functions of Christ in the church.
That's it.
I mean, the Christ-church relationship is definitely not unison. Christ is not submissive to the church, and the church isn't the initiating, sanctifying head.
Correct. The roles are the necessary diversity built into the human institution that allows it to achieve that deep harmony needed to image forth the high purposes of the covenant. This difference in function, which is often called complementarity, is what enables the high-stakes mutual pursuit of joy we are about to discuss.
Christian Hedonism.
Right. The roles are the structure through which that holy joy is actually achieved.
Okay, so let's get into the central theological engine of the source material. We have to define Christian hedonism, which is a term that, let's be honest, it makes people raise an eyebrow. The word hedonism has a lot of secular baggage.
It does.
So how do the sources define it?
The core definition, and you have to hold on to this one tightly, is the pursuit of our own joy in the holy joy of the beloved. And the term hedonism is chosen very deliberately because it acknowledges a fundamental, undeniable truth about human nature. It's a truth that the Reformed tradition has recognized for a very long time.
And the universal truth is the pursuit of happiness.
Absolutely. The sources bring in thinkers like Blaise Pascal to really reinforce this point. Pascal famously said, "All men seek happiness. This is without exception. The will never takes the least step but to this object. This is the motive of every action of every man, even of those who hang themselves."
Wow.
It's just an observation about how we're wired. We are seekers of joy.
I can hear the immediate objection from a listener, though. Wait a minute, isn't that just selfishness? Doesn't Christianity command self-denial and putting others first? I mean, how do you square a desire for your own joy with radical self-giving?
And this is where the distinction between self-interest and selfishness becomes so critical. The sources draw a very clear line.
Okay.
Selfishness seeks private happiness, often at the expense of other people. It's a zero-sum game. For me to win, you have to lose. But Christian love, or this idea of holy hedonism, it acknowledges that self-interest exists, but it channels it. It says, I will find my deepest, truest, most lasting happiness only in the happiness and sanctification of the person I love.
So the goal isn't to stop pursuing joy, because that's impossible according to Pascal and others.
Right, can't be done.
But to redirect to pursuit. So that the object of your love becomes the actual prerequisite for your own satisfaction.
Precisely. Jonathan Edwards made this exact point when he was talking about the call to eternal life. He argued that Jesus knew humanity was already motivated by self-love and the search for lasting happiness. Christ's work was to direct them to the true way to it, the way found in God.
Hmm.
The Christian ethic, as one writer, E.J. Carnell, noted, is premised on self-love, but it's a self-love that seeks its ultimate satisfaction in God, and that then overflows into loving others, because God is glorified when they flourish.
That makes marriage a kind of laboratory for this channeled pursuit.
It is.
So if I'm pursuing my wife's holy joy, I am at the same time securing my own. But if I pursue some private pleasure, like, I don't know, lazy entertainment, at her expense, maybe neglecting the kids or my spiritual leadership, I'm actually destroying my own peace and joy in the long run.
That is the mechanism of this marital matrix. Paul isn't trying to build a dam against our inherent desire for happiness. He's building a channel to purify it and direct it towards its true object. When a spouse lives for private satisfaction, they destroy the oneness and the harmony of the marriage. And so they lose the very thing they were looking for, happiness.
And this principle is just so vividly displayed in Christ's sacrificial love. We have to look at the ultimate example of holy hedonism, Christ's self-giving for the church in Ephesians 5.
Yes, Christ's actions are the pattern for the husband, precisely because they are rooted in this holy self-interest. Verse 25 says he gave himself up for her.
Which sounds like pure altruism, total self-denial.
It does, but you have to read the verses that come right after it to see the motivation. He did this to sanctify her, having cleansed her, that he might present the church to himself in splendor.
So the sacrifice wasn't just an end in itself. It was a means to achieve a specific desirable outcome, a holy, splendid bride for himself.
Exactly. The splendor and the holiness of the church are Christ's great reward. The sources cite Hebrews 12:2, which just removes any doubt about his motivation for the cross. It says he endured the cross, despising the shame, for the joy that was set before him.
And the joy set before him was the joy of marriage to a cleansed, glorious, sanctified bride. In other words, Christ sought his own ultimate joy and satisfaction in the joy and holiness of the church.
Yes.
That makes his love, even the love of Calvary, fundamentally self-interested,
Sure.
but in this holy, God-glorifying way that elevates the person he loves.
It is the highest form of self-love because it seeks the greatest and most lasting joy. If Christ had loved himself less, he would have avoided the cross and lost the ultimate joy of his bride. But because he sought his own joy with such singular determination, he purchased the church and secured his reward.
I still feel like we need to address that apparent contradiction that bothers so many people. The command to hate one's life in this world, from John 12:25. I mean, if we're supposed to be Christian hedonists, why does Jesus command us to reject life?
That rejection is provisional, it's not ultimate. The sources make a very careful distinction here. They frame it as a means to an end. The hating of your life in this world is a necessary step to secure eternal life, and therefore greater joy.
So it's like trading up.
It's trading temporary, lesser joys and comforts for eternal, ultimate joy.
So if a married couple, say, they choose to sacrifice a career advancement or some luxury travel for the sake of spending more time raising their children in the Lord, they aren't rejecting pleasure. They're just trading a worldly pleasure for a deeper holy pleasure that's found in the sanctification of their family.
That is exactly the mechanism. The willingness to suffer, to die, or to endure great difficulty for the beloved's sake, so that the beloved's joy might be full and eternal. That is the ultimate expression of Christian hedonism. It channels that desire for self-preservation into sacrificial action that results in a shared, lasting joy.
Okay, now that we have the theological motivation established, this holy pursuit of joy, let's apply it directly to the roles, starting with the husband. The mandate is, it's terrifyingly high. Husbands are commanded to love their wives as Christ loved the church and gave himself up for her.
And this means the husband is called to assume the function of Christ, the head, the kephali. This designation means the husband has to take the initiative of leading, nurturing, and protecting.
We have to stop and unpack that word, kephala, head. The sources affirm that this signifies leadership and authority. And yet, there's a whole school of thought that tries to neutralize that meaning, arguing that kephale only means source or origin, not governing authority. How does our material deal with that debate?
It deals with it head-on, and it reflects a very common Reformed conclusion on the matter. While kephali can mean source, the context in both Ephesians 5 and 1 Corinthians 11 strongly suggests the meaning of governing authority.
And Paul's own usage of the word is the primary evidence, right?
It is.
Like in Ephesians 1.22, where Christ is established as the head over all things to the church.
Exactly. There is zero doubt that Paul means supremacy, governance, and authority in that verse. And the notes remind us that if a word has multiple possible meanings, you have to choose the one that fits the function being described.
So if Christ is the head of the church, he rules the church.
Right.
So if the husband is the head of the wife, he leads the wife.
That's the logic. And the sources also cite contemporary witnesses confirming that in Paul's era, in philosophy and just in common language, head was a clear reference to sovereignty or a leading position. The philosopher Philo used it that way. It was a well-understood synonym for authority.
I see.
They argue that to try and divorce kephali from leadership is to miss the entire analogy. The head governs the body. The eyes, the ears, the mouth, they are all essential parts of the body, but they were guided and directed by the brain, which is housed in the head.
And even if we did emphasize the source meaning,
Even then, it still implies a primary responsibility for guidance, which is the eyes, nourishment, which is the mouth and protection, the skull and the ears. And that primary responsibility necessarily translates into the necessity of leadership.
but I want to voice a common objection here that a lot of listeners might have. That analogy of the body needing guidance from the head sounds good in theory. Practically, how does a husband who is maybe genuinely poor at spiritual discipline or perhaps less naturally gifted in decision-making lead his wife, who might be far more spiritually mature or intellectually sharp?
That is a critical challenge, and the sources anticipate it. The answer is really twofold. First, leadership is not correlated with intellectual or spiritual superiority. It is correlated with responsibility and initiative.
Okay.
And second, the leadership has to be servant leadership, modeled after Christ.
Let's define that servant leadership again. What is Christ-like headship not?
It is not the fallen extremes. It is not domineering, demanding, hostile domination that reflects the twisted expression of the fall.
Right.
And it is also not lazy indifference or just checking out, abdication. That's also a failure of the role. Christ's headship is leading out in the kind of love that is willing to die to give her life, mirroring Christ, who said that the leader become as one who serves.
So, the husband's role is defined by taking the initiative in meeting the needs of the family and prioritizing his wife's sanctification. It's not about being the boss. It's about being the primary servant.
Exactly. Think of it as assuming the role of a shepherd who is accountable for the flock. This means the husband feels a greater weight of responsibility for leading the family in the things of the Spirit.
Like initiating family prayer.
Initiating family prayer, structuring Bible reading, seeking God's will for the children's moral and spiritual development, and setting the example himself.
The source material gives a very concrete hypothetical example about this. It's about the competent wife and the less competent husband. If a husband struggles a lot with reading and, articulating his thoughts, but the wife is a gifted educator and speaker, how does he still lead in family devotions?
He leads by taking the initiative. The husband says, I am responsible for the spiritual temperature of this home. Let's begin our family devotion tonight, and I'm going to ask my wife, who's very gifted in clarity, to read the text and guide us through the first set of questions. In that moment, he has fulfilled his leadership role. He initiated the spiritual practice, he affirmed his wife's gifts, all while maintaining the structure of guidance.
So his leadership is recognized by his spirit of initiative and his assumption of that primary moral vision, not necessarily by being the best speaker or the most gifted Bible scholar in the room.
That's the subtlety the sources want us to grasp. The leadership is primarily moral and directional. The husband is tasked with shaping the moral fabric and the happy peace of the home, with giving the family a mission. And this requires him to be the one who sets the example of being up early and alone with God, seeking direction, even if his time with God is less structured or eloquent than his wife's might be.
Now, we have to bring this back to hedonism. How does this overwhelming responsibility and this call to service guarantee the husband's own joy? Why is this massive self-giving pursuit actually an act of self-love?
This ties right back to that one flesh principle that's laid out in Ephesians 5.28. He who loves his wife loves himself. They're two distinct individuals, yes, but they have become a biological, a sociological, and a spiritual unity. When a husband harms his wife, he is harming himself. When he makes her holy and happy, he is making himself holy and happy.
It's the ultimate win-win scenario, and it's all rooted in their oneness.
That's it. The sources state that the husband should devote the same creative energy, the same determined time, and the same thoughtful devotion to making his wife holy and happy that he naturally devotes to ensuring his own personal comfort and well-being. If a husband spent just half the effort nourishing and cherishing his wife that he spends on, say, optimizing his golf game, his marriage would flourish.
That reframes the entire task. This isn't altruism where the husband just depletes himself. It's the most sophisticated form of self-interest. Because he has become one with his wife, his pursuit of her joy is the most effective way to secure his own joy. This pursuit of mutual delight through self-giving leadership is the pattern Christ established. All right, if the husband's role is patterned after Christ the head, then the wife's role is patterned after the church, which submits to Christ. Wives are called to submit to their own husbands as to the Lord. This is maybe the most difficult concept for a modern audience, and it requires a lot of theological precision.
It does. We have to define what the sources mean by submission and, just as importantly, what they do not mean. Submission is not a judgment on competence or intelligence. It is a judgment on God-ordained function.
So they're about the structure.
It is about the structure of the relationship, not the gifts of the individuals in it.
So how is submission defined here exactly?
It's defined first as an attitude. It's the wife's responsibility to recognize and honor her husband's greater responsibility to lead the home. It shows up as a disposition to yield, an inclination to affirm and follow his leadership and vision. This, of course, is assuming you have a husband who is actively trying to love and lead like Christ.
But we have to stress again, like we said earlier, that leadership isn't correlated with intellectual ability. A wife could have 3 graduate degrees and the husband might have a high school diploma. She still has that disposition to yield to his directional initiative.
That is the nature of the harmony. Her intellectual superiority in a certain field doesn't negate his God-ordained function as the initiator of direction. She uses her superior gifts to help him achieve the family's mission, but she waits for him to set the mission.
I see.
Her role is to bring her superior intellect and spiritual wisdom to bear on his leadership, to refine it, to inform it, but to do so with a cooperative, affirming spirit.
This requires us to immediately address the absolute limits of human submission. This is where the highest scrutiny from the audience lies, and the sources need to be crystal clear.
And they are. The submission of one human being to another is never, ever absolute. The husband does not replace Christ as her supreme authority. Her allegiance to the head of the church always trumps her allegiance to the head of the home.
So a wife must never follow her husband's leadership into sin.
Never.
Can we expand on that? What if the husband is neglectful, or morally damaging, or even abusive? What guidance does the material give when the pattern is just utterly broken?
The sources maintain that the command to submit to the structure remains, but the command to obey a sinful directive just vanishes. If a husband commands his wife to lie, or to steal, or to participate in anything that is clearly against Scripture, her submission to Christ compels her to refuse.
And in cases of physical danger?
In cases of physical danger, like abuse, her right and her necessity to seek safety and protection and to call in external authorities is paramount. Submission does not mean accepting physical or emotional destruction. It requires her to preserve her life and the lives of her children, recognizing that her husband has utterly failed his Christ-like command to nourish and cherish.
So if the husband's command moves beyond poor judgment and into clear sin or physical endangerment, the wife's submission just stops being operative. Because his headship is fundamentally voided by his failure to represent Christ, who always leads toward holiness and protection.
That is the conclusion. However, the sources do acknowledge a paradox when you're dealing with sinful or absent leadership. Even when resisting, she must maintain a spirit of submission.
Okay, that sounds incredibly difficult and counterintuitive. How does a person maintain a submissive spirit while saying a firm no to a husband's sinful decision?
It means the resistance is rooted in sorrow and a desire for harmony, not in defiance or insubordination. Her attitude should communicate a reluctance to resist and a genuine longing for him to lead righteously so that she can gladly follow him. The sources suggest this is shown through her gentleness, her tranquil demeanor, and her sacrificial love. She refuses the action, but she honors the position.
Let's take the specific case of an unbelieving husband, citing 1 Peter 3.1. He provides no spiritual vision. If the wife is trying to raise her children in the faith, how does she provide that vision without communicating what the sources call that cocky spirit of insubordination.
This requires immense wisdom. She still recognizes that submission is the will of God, so she continues to support him as far as her conscience allows. She should never belittle him to the children or create a spiritual schism in the home.
So what does she do?
If she needs to give spiritual direction like initiating nightly prayer or reading scripture to the kids, she does so humbly. Her approach, especially if he disapproves, should be to explain her allegiance to Christ in that tranquil, gentle spirit. The goal is to win him in quietness by her powerful and sacrificial love.
That's a strategy that's focused on character and redemption, not on confrontation and power struggles.
Yes.
It's about giving him room to assume his rightful leadership, even while she temporarily provides vision where he fails.
It requires her to understand that her greatest weapon isn't argument or defiance. It's character and love. Her quiet, holy behavior can speak louder than words, particularly to an unbelieving husband. And that fulfills the goal of Christian hedonism in her life.
Which brings us to the wife's unique expression of Christian hedonism. If the husband finds his joy in her sanctification, where does the wife find her ultimate joy?
She finds her joy in the joy of her husband. By affirming and honoring his God-ordained role as leader and successfully following his godly vision, she is contributing to the harmony of the home and the demonstration of that Christ-church relationship. Her happiness is found in seeing him flourish in the Christ-like role God assigned to him, and in the peace that results from a household governed by divine design. The roles are entirely interdependent vehicles for their mutual delight.
So we've established the original pure design and these two high mandates, Christ-like headship and church-like submission. But we know that sin has just thoroughly corrupted these good designs, leaving us with messy, often painful marriages.
And the sources are very clear that the fall didn't abolish the roles, it twisted them into caricatures. A man's loving headship, that initiating, nurturing protection, it was twisted into one of two damaging, controlling extremes.
What are those extremes?
First, there's hostile domination, where the husband uses his authority as a weapon, he demands obedience, he rules like a tyrant, and he refuses to serve. This is a twisted representation of Christ as a harsh judge, not the loving shepherd.
And the other extreme?
Lazy indifference. This is the husband's abdication of responsibility. He prefers leisure or passive entertainment to any kind of spiritual initiative. This leaves his wife feeling abandoned and forces her to carry the primary moral weight of the family, which is just a massive failure of Christ-like leadership.
And the woman's intelligent, willing submission was similarly corrupted into its own dual extremes.
Yes. Her willingness to yield to leadership was twisted into manipulative obsequiousness in some cases, a calculated false yielding that's really intended to gain control through feigned weakness or emotional maneuvering.
And on the other side?
On the other side, it becomes brazen insubordination where she openly defies the order. She views any yielding as a sign of weakness or inferiority, and she seeks control through constant challenge and resentment.
So that means redemption isn't about dismantling the roles like some modern solutions suggest.
No.
It's about the recovery of God's original intention for the structure.
Precisely. Redemption is the restoration of the created order. The gospel doesn't eliminate the structure, it cleanses the motivation. Husbands redeem fallen headship by consciously modeling it after Christ. Self-giving, serving love that puts the wife's sanctification and joy above his own convenience.
And wives redeem fallen submission by modeling it after the church. A willing, intelligent, affirming submission that honors his leadership initiative without abandoning her ultimate higher allegiance to Christ.
And when both parties, motivated by this idea of Christian hedonism, consciously seek their ultimate joy in the sanctification and delight of the other, they're functioning exactly as God designed. They make the great mystery manifest. It's a visual display of Christ and the church for God's glory and for their overflowing mutual joy.
And what I found so compelling in the notes was the short personal testimony about the practical viability of this whole pursuit.
It really grounds the theory in lived reality, doesn't it? The author of the source material mentioned that since 1968, he and his wife deliberately stalked our own joy and the joy of each other. And they found that this channeled pursuit was the path to the heart's desire. It just underscores that this high theological concept isn't some unattainable ideal. It is the designed pathway to marital peace and happiness.
So we stand back now and look at the landscape of this dinked eyes. Marriage is not a secular contract. It is a divine drama, a visual representation of Christ's eternal relationship with his church. And this structure is driven by the joyful pursuit of the spouse's holy well-being within their specific complementary roles.
And the great mandate of Christian hedonism is this: your pursuit of happiness is not something to be squashed. It is to be channeled. Your greatest satisfaction is found precisely in giving joy to the beloved within the roles God assigned.
So misery is just a result of seeking private happiness at the expense of the unity and the purpose of the marriage.
That's it.
We want to leave you with a concrete thought to consider. If you truly believe you are wired to seek joy, then accept the premise that the greatest act of self-love in your marriage is the determined, Christ-like pursuit of your spouse's sanctification and joy. That is where your deepest, truest happiness is secured.
And if the eternal covenant between Christ and the Church governs and dictates the structure and function of our most intimate human bond marriage, then what other areas of life, perhaps our work, our finances, or our parenting, are also designed specifically to image forth God's ultimate plan? And how might a deeper understanding of that overarching design change our daily pursuits?
We appreciate you joining us for this deep dive into God's design and the theological notes surrounding it. We'll continue this exploration next time on Reformed Thinking.
Until then, may your search for joy be directed by Christ and result in the glorification of God.